Shock hook, opening scene. "Order!" Justice Alsop snapped, cutting through the room like a gavel strike before the gavel even fell. The word hung there, sharp and final, as cameras zoomed tighter and the murmurs died into a brittle silence. He leaned forward, voice edged with certainty, reminding everyone who controlled the room, who set the rules, who decided when the conversation was over. It was authority spoken out loud, unchallenged for decades, delivered with the expectation of compliance. Across the table, Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her voice. She looked up slowly, eyes steady, posture still, the kind of stillness that unsettles people used to command. The air shifted. Even before she spoke, something felt off, like the rhythm of the hearing had broken. Alsop continued, dismissive now, brushing past her point as if it were a footnote. He spoke over her, then paused, waiting for the quiet submission that usually followed. Instead, Crockett answered, measured and calm, with a sentence so precise it landed heavier than any shout. It wasn't defiance, it was correction, and the correction was public. The room reacted before the judge did. A ripple moved through the benches. Pens froze mid-scratch. A few heads turned, not toward the bench, but toward her. The cameras caught it all, the blink, the brief tightening of Alsop's jaw, the momentary delay before his response came. For the first time, the authority he asserted seconds earlier didn't fully hold. This wasn't just a disagreement, it was a crack in the performance. A reminder that power sounds different when someone refuses to be diminished by it. Crockett hadn't raised her voice, but she had raised the stakes, exposing a tension the room could no longer ignore. Outside the frame, the unspoken history pressed in, generations watching this exchange through lenses and live streams, waiting to see whether respect would be demanded or deferred again. For many, it felt familiar, the subtle test of who gets grace and who gets cut off. That recognition tightened the silence, charging the moment with expectation. Everyone sensed accountability hovering, heavy, unavoidable, and overdue in a room unused to being challenged publicly. Viewers watching at home felt it instantly, that electric sense that something irreversible had just begun. Because in that pause, in that silence, it became clear the script had changed, and what Crockett said next would flip the entire hearing on its head. To understand why that pause mattered, you have to understand what this hearing represented long before Crockett ever spoke. This wasn't a routine exchange buried in legal jargon. It was a public test of how power behaves when it's questioned, and who is allowed to question it without consequence. The courtroom wasn't just a room, it was a stage where history, identity, and authority collided under bright lights. Justice Alsop carried the weight of the institution behind him, a system that prides itself on neutrality while often moving with quiet bias. His tone, his interruptions, his assumptions were familiar to anyone who has ever watched authority lean on confidence instead of fairness. For decades, that posture has gone largely unchecked, protected by robes, titles, and the unspoken rule that respect flows in one direction. That's why this moment felt different. Someone wasn't playing their assigned role. Crockett didn't walk into that room as a symbol by accident. She came as a representative of communities that have learned to listen carefully, because speaking too freely often comes at a cost. Immigrants, women, people of color recognize this dynamic instantly, the way authority tests you, talks over you, waits for you to shrink. This exchange activated something deeper than policy. It touched dignity. Nationally, the stakes were already high. Trust in institutions is fragile, strained by years of visible double standards and selective accountability. Every interruption, every dismissive glance feeds a growing belief that the system protects itself first. When viewers saw Crockett hold her ground without theatrics, it challenged that narrative. It suggested that preparation and clarity could still pierce the armor of arrogance. Culturally, the moment landed like a mirror. Social feeds lit up with people replaying the clip, dissecting tone, body language, pauses. It wasn't just about who was right legally, it was about who was heard. For a generation raised on viral accountability, this wasn't background noise. It was a moment to rally around, a signal that silence isn't the only option anymore. Morally, the tension cut even deeper. Respect should never require submission. Authority should never fear transparency. Yet the discomfort in the room revealed how rarely those principles are tested in real time. Crockett's composure exposed an uncomfortable truth. When power is used to dominate rather than deliberate, it collapses under scrutiny. This is why the exchange spread so quickly. People recognized themselves in it. They remembered meetings, interviews, classrooms, and courtrooms where they were talked over and expected to accept it quietly. Seeing someone refuse that script without anger or spectacle felt like permission. Permission to speak clearly, permission to demand fairness, permission to expect better from those who claim authority. Behind the bench, beyond the cameras, there was another pressure building. Allies watching closely, critics waiting eagerly, careers, reputations, and narratives balanced on the next exchange. Everyone understood that this was no longer just about a single ruling or procedural point. It was about whether the system could tolerate being spoken to instead of bowed before. The silence that followed felt deliberate, stretched thin with expectation. No one shifted, no one interrupted. The room itself seemed to wait, aware that the next words would either restore the old order or expose it completely. History has a way of turning small moments into lasting reference points. That's why viewers leaned in. They sensed consequences forming. This wasn't going to end as another clipped exchange filed away in transcripts. Something larger was unfolding, something that would ripple beyond this hearing and into how people talk about justice, representation, and voice. Because what happened next changed everything. Section 3. The antagonist, villain. Backstory. Justice Alsop did not become who he was by accident. He was shaped by a system that rewards certainty over curiosity, seniority over reflection. From the moment he entered the judiciary, he learned that authority, once granted, rarely needs to explain itself. Years on the bench had trained him to expect deference, to treat challenges not as questions but as disruptions. In his courtroom, order was not negotiated, it was imposed. That posture showed itself long before Crockett ever spoke. His reputation was built on control, on a sharp tongue wrapped in procedural language. He interrupted often, corrected publicly, and framed impatience as efficiency. Supporters called it experience, critics called it arrogance. Both were reacting to the same reality, a man accustomed to rooms bending to his will. Yet beneath that confidence lived a contradiction. Justice Alsop spoke often about fairness and equal treatment, about the purity of the law standing above personal bias. But his conduct revealed something else, an instinctive hierarchy about who deserved patience and who did not. He extended grace selectively, granting space to voices that sounded familiar while tightening the reins on those that did not. It wasn't written anywhere. It didn't need to be. It was enforced through tone. Power insulated him. Robes do that. Titles do that. When you are rarely challenged, your habits harden into beliefs, interruptions feel justified, dismissiveness feels efficient, and when someone pushes back, even politely, it feels like disrespect. That is how authority mistakes accountability for insubordination. There were moments, archived and forgotten, where this pattern surfaced before. Subtle comments brushed aside, concerns minimized, questions reframed as inconveniences. Each time, the system absorbed the friction and moved on. No viral clips, no national scrutiny, no consequences. Those small moments accumulated, reinforcing the illusion that control was the same as correctness. Justice Alsup believed in the image of himself as fair. That belief mattered more than the reality. It allowed him to dismiss criticism without self-examination. After all, if you see yourself as impartial, anyone who disagrees must be emotional, unprepared, or politically motivated. This belief protected him, but it also hollowed something essential. Empathy eroded, listening became optional. The hypocrisy lay there, quiet but unmistakable. He demanded respect while withholding it. He preached decorum while wielding impatience. He framed interruptions as procedure and resistance as attitude. In doing so, he missed the simplest truth. Authority without humility invites collapse. There was also the comfort of precedent. He had watched assertiveness soften under pressure, watched voices trail off when met with interruption. Each time reinforced the same lesson: the bench speaks last. Over time, this pattern stopped feeling like power and started feeling like entitlement. In public appearances and written opinions, he spoke eloquently about justice as an abstract ideal. But abstraction has a way of distancing those who wield it from those who live its consequences. When justice becomes theoretical, it can ignore tone, context, and humanity. That distance allowed him to believe he was above the fray, even as his behavior shaped it. The irony is that institutions survive not on force, but on legitimacy. And legitimacy erodes quietly when people stop believing they will be treated with respect. Justice Alsup underestimated how visible that erosion had become. He underestimated the audience beyond the courtroom, watching closely, recording everything, unwilling to accept the old explanations anymore. This was something more dangerous. A man convinced of his own righteousness, insulated by tradition, unaware that the ground beneath him had shifted. The power he relied on was real, but it was brittle. It depended on silence, on assumption, on the absence of challenge. All it would take was one moment, one response delivered without fear, to expose that brittleness to the light. And as Crockett sat across from him, listening carefully, saying nothing yet, the judge could not see it coming. He thought the room belonged to him, the protagonist, Crockett's backstory. Crockett learned early that rooms do not greet everyone the same. Some doors open automatically. Others require credentials, patience, and an unshakable calm. Before the cameras, before the headlines, she trained in environments where preparation was not optional, but protective. Law taught her that precision is power, that facts can steady a shaking room, and that silence, used correctly, can be louder than interruption. Her legal background wasn't built on shortcuts or spectacle. It was built on briefs marked until the margins disappeared, on arguments tested against hostile questions, on the discipline of knowing a case so well that pressure becomes irrelevant. In courtrooms and conference rooms alike, she learned to read the temperature, to recognize when authority was posturing and when it was listening. That instinct did not come from confidence alone. It came from repetition. Crockett has spent years navigating spaces where doubt arrives before she speaks. She knows the look, the slight pause that signals skepticism. She has heard her points reframed by others, watched credit drift away, and felt the subtle suggestion that she prove herself again. Instead of responding with volume, she responded with mastery. Hostile rooms taught her economy. Every word had to earn its place. There is a discipline in restraint that outsiders often mistake for softness. Crockett understands the difference. She learned that reacting too quickly gives power away, so she learned to wait, to listen, to let others reveal themselves fully before stepping in. This wasn't passivity, it was strategy refined by experience. Preparation became her reputation. Colleagues describe her as meticulous, someone who anticipates counter-arguments before they're spoken. She studies not just the law, but the people wielding it. Patterns matter, tone matters, timing matters. In contentious settings, she rarely speaks first, not because she lacks something to say, but because she knows exactly when her voice will matter most. That precision is rooted in identity as much as training. Crockett carries the awareness of representing more than herself. For communities used to being spoken about instead of listened to, mistakes are magnified. Sloppiness is punished. She internalized that reality and turned it into discipline. Every appearance became an opportunity to model control without surrender. Her silence is intentional. When authority overreaches, she lets it. When impatience surfaces, she notes it. When interruptions pile up, she tracks them. By the time she speaks, the record is already written. The room may not realize it yet, but the imbalance has been documented through behavior alone. This approach frustrates those who expect immediate compliance or emotional reaction. They mistake calm for concession. They misread her stillness as hesitation. That miscalculation has followed Crockett into many rooms, and each time it has ended the same way. When she finally speaks, the shift is unmistakable. She understands the psychology of power. Those accustomed to control rely on rhythm. Interrupt, dismiss, move on. Crockett breaks that rhythm by refusing to rush. She forces a pause, and in that pause, authority loses its footing. Her supporters recognize this immediately. They see themselves in her restraint, in the careful navigation of spaces not designed with them in mind. Watching her is validating because it rejects the lie that dignity requires silence or that respect must be requested. She embodies the idea that preparation can outmaneuver arrogance without raising a voice. By the time she sits across from Justice Alsup, none of this is accidental. She has reviewed the law, anticipated the tone, and accepted the tension. She is not there to win applause or deliver viral soundbites. She is there to establish clarity where condescension once lived. Every note she takes, every pause she allows, tightens the moment. The audience may not see the calculation, but they feel its effect. Something is being set up deliberately and patiently. She has learned that credibility is cumulative. It is built through consistency, through showing up prepared when others rely on volume, through choosing clarity over confrontation. In moments designed to provoke, she grounds herself in the record, in statute, in the simple discipline of staying present. This grounding allows her to absorb pressure without reflecting it back as chaos. It keeps the focus where it belongs, on substance rather than spectacle. That discipline carries emotional weight. It reassures those watching that strength does not require dominance. It models an alternative to the exhaustion of constant defensiveness. Crockett's control offers relief, a reminder that representation can look like steadiness, not just resistance. In a media landscape addicted to outrage, her approach feels almost radical. Each encounter sharpens her sense of timing. She recognizes when a room has reached its limit, when authority has overplayed its hand. She waits for that moment, not to embarrass, but to clarify. When she speaks into the silence she allowed to grow. The result is not conflict for its own sake, but accountability that cannot be waved away. This is why her presence unsettles people used to unchecked command. They expect reaction. They receive composure. They anticipate retreat. They encounter resolve. The mismatch creates vulnerability, and vulnerability exposes truth. It reminds audiences that progress is often quiet at first, measured in pauses and choices before it becomes visible, undeniable, and impossible to reverse. Those moments accumulate, then arrive at once, reshaping the balance of the room. She didn't come to perform. She came to be precise. Debate, escalation. The hearing snapped back into motion, sharper now, louder in its silences. Justice Alsup leaned forward again, voice tightening, pressing for answers already given. Crockett looked down, pen moving, absorbing the pressure without reaction. The rhythm quickened. Question, interruption, clarification denied. The imbalance was no longer subtle. He spoke over her mid-sentence, then corrected the point she hadn't finished making. A pause followed, not for her, but for him. He filled it. The cameras caught Crockett's stillness, her shoulders squared, her face unreadable. Around them, attorneys shifted, sensing the escalation. Justice Alsup pressed harder. His questions came faster, narrower, framed as conclusions rather than inquiries. Each time Crockett began to respond, he cut in, reshaping her words, testing how much ground he could reclaim. It felt less like a hearing and more like a challenge. The judge's tone sharpened, impatience slipping through the formal language. He emphasized his authority with subtle gestures, a raised brow, a tightened jaw, the unspoken reminder of who controlled the clock. Crockett kept writing. The pen never paused. Observers could feel it building, every interruption stacked on the last, every dismissal amplifying the imbalance. Crockett was being tested publicly, her credibility weighed in real time. She met the pressure with quiet focus, eyes down, breathing steady, refusing to be rushed. The room reacted in fragments. A cough suppressed, a glance exchanged, a chair shifted slightly. No one spoke, but everyone watched. The judge's confidence grew louder with each interruption, while Crockett's silence grew heavier, charged with intent. Justice Alsup leaned back, then forward again, pressing for compliance. He framed the exchange as impatience with inefficiency, but the edge betrayed something else. Control was being asserted, not earned. Crockett looked up briefly, then back down, continuing to write. The contrast was unmistakable. One voice filled the room, one absorbed it. Authority leaned on volume, on repetition, on the assumption that it would not be challenged. Crockett let it play out, collecting the moment piece by piece. Questions turned into statements. Statements into accusations. The judge challenged her understanding, her framing, her conclusions. Crockett did not respond immediately. She listened. She wrote. The silence stretched, unnerving in its calm. For viewers, the imbalance was impossible to miss. This was power pressing down, testing limits in plain sight. Crockett's restraint reframed the exchange, exposing the pressure without naming it. Each interruption documented itself. Justice Alsup paused, waiting for submission. It didn't come. Instead, the quiet grew heavier, the pen still moving. Crockett's composure unsettled the room, hinting that something was being prepared beneath the surface. The judge pressed once more, voice firm, almost daring a response. Crockett's eyes lifted, met his briefly, then dropped again. The message was clear. She was choosing her moment. Across the benches, reactions flickered and vanished. Some nodded almost imperceptibly. Others stiffened, sensing the line being crossed. The rapid exchanges blurred into a pattern of dominance and restraint, louder questions met by quieter resolve. Crockett's stillness became its own statement, forcing the imbalance into view. Each second without her response widened the gap between authority asserted and authority deserved, and the room felt the cost of that distance. It was uncomfortable, revealing how quickly control depended on compliance rather than consent. That discomfort spread, thickening the silence and sharpening every glance in the room. No one missed what was happening. They felt it. So did he. Everyone did, inside. The judge's impatience crept closer to the surface, questions tightening like a vice. Each attempt to hurry the exchange only slowed it further. Crockett's restraint reframed the moment as endurance versus urgency, preparation versus presumption. The longer she waited, the more the imbalance spoke for itself, until the room seemed to recognize that the next move would belong entirely to her. Eyes stayed fixed, breaths held, aware that control was slipping from the bench into the pause itself. Anticipation hummed, sharp and electric, as if the room knew a pivot was imminent. The tension demanded release, and everyone waited. For her, for the moment to break. It would, soon, enough. Tension coiled tighter. Every second felt deliberate. The room seemed to lean forward collectively, waiting for release. And then Crockett stopped taking notes. The mic drop counterattack. She lifted her pen and set it down deliberately, a small sound that carried. Then she looked up. Not rushed, not reactive. Calm settled into the room as if invited. Crockett began by stating the statute, naming it cleanly, grounding the moment in law rather than tone. Her voice was even, measured, impossible to interrupt without making the interruption obvious. She did not accuse, she clarified. Each sentence landed with intention, resetting the frame from dominance to accuracy. She walked the room through the legal foundation slowly, not to educate, but to establish record, dates, language, precedent. She cited exactly where the authority ended and where discretion began. With each reference, the imbalance narrowed. This was not opinion, it was documentation. The judge shifted in his chair. The tone softened, just slightly, enough to register. Silence followed her pauses, the kind that forces listening. Crockett corrected the record next, gently, almost generously. She restated the question as it should have been asked, then answered that version instead. It was surgical. In doing so, she exposed the gap between what was implied and what was provable. A few attorneys glanced up from their notes. Someone in the gallery leaned forward. Control was shifting, not through confrontation, but through clarity. The judge attempted to reclaim the exchange, interjecting once, then stopping himself. His voice returned, but altered, slower, more careful. Crockett continued, citing the precise moment where procedure had crossed into overreach. She didn't name it emotionally, she named it legally. That distinction mattered, it forced acknowledgement. The bench no longer felt elevated, it felt exposed. Pauses became part of her argument. She would finish a point, then stop, allowing the weight of it to settle. The silence did the rest. No interruptions came. When the judge responded, it was no longer dismissive, it was restrained. The room noticed. A quiet recalibration occurred, one that could not be undone. Crockett's control reframed authority itself, separating power from precision. She addressed the implication behind his earlier framing, not by challenging intent, but by narrowing interpretation. Words matter, she reminded, because they define limits. She showed where the assumption exceeded the statute, where inference replaced evidence. It was devastating precisely because it was unemotional. The facts stood alone, unprotected by volume, undeniable in their order. Across the room, reactions surfaced in fragments, a nod from counsel, a raised brow from the clerk. The judge adjusted his glasses, buying time. When he spoke again, the edge was gone. He acknowledged the point, not fully, not graciously, but enough. The shift was unmistakable. Crockett had changed the terms of engagement. This was not about winning an argument. It was about restoring balance. Crockett continued methodically, tying each correction back to the core principle at stake. Process matters because people do. Precision matters because power listens when it has to. She did not rush to a conclusion. She let the record build around her, brick by brick, until it stood on its own. The judge tried once more to summarize, but this time he echoed her language. It was subtle, but revealing. Authority had adapted. Crockett watched, listening carefully, then clarified again, ensuring the shift was complete. She closed the loop, leaving no room for retreat into ambiguity. The room exhaled. For viewers, the payoff landed deep. This was composure as resistance, preparation as protection, a reminder that you do not need permission to assert truth, only the discipline to carry it correctly. Crockett's response validated anyone who has ever been underestimated in a room that mistook calm for weakness. The empowerment was quiet, but unmistakable. In that moment, the hierarchy inverted. The bench listened, the room followed. Crockett held the floor without claiming it, her control absolute because it was earned. This was not shouting, this was command through clarity. The silence that followed her final sentence was not awkward, it was respectful. The judge nodded once, curtly, and moved the hearing forward. But something fundamental had changed. The power dynamic had been rewritten in plain sight. Crockett had not overstepped. She had illuminated the boundary, and in doing so she made it impossible to pretend it wasn't there. Attorneys scribbled notes faster now, recalculating. The gallery buzzed softly. Social feeds were already lighting up beyond the walls, though no one inside needed confirmation. They had witnessed it. Control had been reclaimed not by force, but by fact. The message was clear. Preparation changes outcomes. Crockett sat back slightly, hands still, expression unchanged. She had delivered exactly what the moment required, nothing more. The judge proceeded carefully now, aware of the audience he no longer commanded alone. The hearing continued, but the balance was altered. Everyone felt it. This was the payoff viewers waited for, the release of tension earned through patience. It affirmed that dignity, when anchored in preparation, can reshape even the most rigid rooms. Crockett had spoken, and the system had listened. But the story was not finished. The hearing moved on, yet the silence lingered, heavy with implication. What had just happened would not stay contained. It was already escaping the room. Viewers leaned closer, sensing the aftermath approaching. This exchange would travel, be dissected, celebrated, criticized. The consequences were only beginning to form. Power had been confronted with preparation, and preparation had won. Not loudly, not theatrically, cleanly. The satisfaction settled in, shared by those who recognized the pattern and the break from it. Control had shifted, and everyone knew it. The judge's voice carried on, procedural now, careful. Crockett listened again, ready. The audience sensed the ripple extending outward, toward commentary, toward consequence. This moment would not fade quietly. It had momentum. And as the hearing pressed forward, one truth lingered unmistakably. Authority had been answered, not with anger, but with mastery. The payoff had landed. The next chapter was already forming. Nothing could return the room to what it was before. The balance had shifted, and the consequences were waiting just beyond the doors. The satisfaction was complete, but the story was not. What followed would ripple outward, louder than the silence that made it possible. Viewers stayed, knowing the aftermath would matter as much as the moment itself, and that what came next would test the system even further. The room moved on, but history had paused there, marking the exchange for what it was. Control had changed hands, and everyone felt the shift settling in. The hearing continued, but nothing about it was the same. The payoff had arrived, and the consequences were just beginning. Everyone knew the story would travel. It already was, everywhere, watching,